When we think about examples of compassion in the Bible, our minds jump pretty quickly to stories of the New Testament. We think of the feel-good stories where compassion is made obvious, parable stories like that of the Good Samaritan or the prodigal son, healing stories where Jesus heals the blind and tells the dying to get up, take their mat, and go. They've been healed. When we talk about the way that God shows compassion for others, it is usually through the stories of Jesus. The Old Testament, those Hebrew scriptures, don't have quite the same reputation. The God of the Hebrew Bible, it has been suggested, is rarely described as compassionate, though I may dispute that. In fact, many people feel that there's dissonance between God of the Old Testament and God of the New Testament. The God of the New Testament is loving, kind, and compassionate, while the God of the Old Testament is harsh, violent, and cruel. I disagree with this, but bear with me. Stories of compassion in the Hebrew scriptures require a bit of detective work. We need a magnifying glass at times to decipher through those stories to find models of God's compassion. And today's text, as made obvious maybe by Dot, is no exception. It begins with the Egyptians enslaving the Israelites, forcing them to work tirelessly under cruel conditions. And it evolves into infanticide of male offspring, where midwives have been instructed to allow female infants to survive, but male infants to be killed. And at the very end, it's a blanket order for all people to drown male babies in the Nile River. Yeah, finding compassion in this text requires some more detective work. But it is here, in the midst of horrible forms of oppression, there is a glimpse and hope of compassion. Shiphrah and Puah, the two Hebrew midwives. Two names, two women, two rebellious women who we don't hear about often enough, if we've ever heard about them at all. They are not in agreement with the orders of the Egyptian king. They fear God, and it's not fear in the sense of being afraid or scared of God, but rather they fear God out of reverence and awe for God. So much so that they would be willing to disobey the king's orders in order to do the right thing. Two women, full of courage, who defied the expectation of their authority. Two women who prioritized the health, the safety, and the well-being of their neighbors. There's the compassion we were looking for. Compassion, as modeled by women like Shiphrah and Puah, takes courage. Compassion, especially in this case, is a risky endeavor, making one vulnerable to a variety of consequences depending on the circumstance. But is compassion worth it? Well, we have to be the judge of that. In our congregational book read this summer, See No Stranger by Valerie Carr, she discusses the concept of reimagining, and we just touched on this chapter this past Tuesday. She recalls her experience at Yale Law School and how she didn't quite fit the mold of a typical law student. She was surrounded by so many students who sought prestige in their work and was discouraged until she found a sort of underground law clinic that changed her perception and her participation in law. She got involved with volunteering at the clinic, working on cases that were oh so not glamorous, but that put compassion toward neighbor in focus, made it a priority. The work of the clinic defied the prestigious expectation of the institution. Carr talks about how we must not only critique and change the institutions as they exist, but we might also be able to reimagine what a transformed institution might look like. One that prioritizes justice over elitism, one that prioritizes health over wealth, one that decides compassion is indeed worth the risk. Compassion towards others takes courage, and so does compassion towards ourselves. As you may well be aware, we have just passed the midway point of the 2020 Olympics, taking place in Tokyo, Japan. Whether or not you have paid much attention to these Olympic Games, you have likely heard a few stories or seen a few headlines about them. Does the name Simone Biles ring a bell? Simone Biles, an Olympic gymnast for Team USA, demonstrated courageous compassion this past week. Biles pulled out of Olympic competition at the start of the team finals, citing mental health reasons. Defying the expectations and the hopes of so many people, quite literally an entire country, Simone Biles chose self-compassion. She risked criticism from the public, gave up the opportunity to add more gold medals to her collection, and she isn't the first to do so in highly competitive situations. What about Naomi Osaka? Osaka is also an Olympic tennis player for Japan, but she did so by pulling out of the French Open tournament earlier this year to prioritize her own mental well-being, defying the expectations and the hopes of so many, saying no to authority figures and societal pressures, but saying yes to compassion, self-compassion. Shifra, Pua, Valerie, Simone, Naomi. If we had a lot more time, I bet we could list a whole host of other names who decided that compassion was worth the risk. Our God of compassion who works through Jesus, and yes, Old Testament figures like Shifra and Pua, calls us to be courageous, to take the risk, to act with compassion both toward others and unto ourselves. So may we follow the example that so many have set before us and lead so that others may follow God's compassion too. Amen.